A sure sign of the season, an icebreaker back in Midland Harbor, but this year it's a lot bigger.
But if we're going to get those icebreakers that we need to secure our supply chains, and we need to invest in bringing our manufacturing back here home to our American shores.
The United States can keep insisting these are international waters, but when our icebreakers are patrolling them, when our ports are servicing the ships, when our regulations are keeping the Arctic safe, sovereignty isn't what you claim on paper. It's what you can actually control. That was Mark Carney speaking to reporters after announcing a $7 billion investment in Arctic icebreakers. No diplomatic hedging, no carefully balanced language, just a direct message to Washington. The era of treating Canadian Arctic waters like an American highway is over. For more than 70 years, the United States sent ships through the Northwest Passage without asking permission. American submarines surfaced at the North Pole inside Canadian territory and declared the waters international. U.S. icebreakers sailed through Canadian Arctic channels flying American flags, and Ottawa was told there was nothing it could do. And for decades, that was true. Canada claimed sovereignty, but it couldn't enforce it. There was no infrastructure, no military presence, and no practical way to control who used the passage. So the United States, Russia, and eventually China all treated Canada's Arctic claims as polite fiction. That changed when Donald Trump decided to apply economic pressure on Canada. He talked about annexation. He called Canada the 51st state. He weaponized tariffs. And instead of forcing submission, he pushed Canada to finally do what it should have done decades ago.
Today, there is no doubt that we face an increasingly dangerous world.
Build real physical control over its Arctic territory. Carney looked north and saw something Washington underestimated: a $900 billion trade corridor opening as Arctic ice melts, a shipping route that cuts nearly 7,000 kilometers off voyages between Asia and Europe. Arctic waters that Russia and China are desperate to access. Canadian territory the United States kept insisting belonged to the world. Trump believed economic threats would force Canada to accept American terms. Instead, he gave Canada the motivation to turn pressure into power. Tonight's story is about how Canada is doing exactly that, how a climate crisis became a strategic opportunity, and how the Northwest Passage is becoming the place where Canada finally tells the United States, our territory, our rules. Geography explains why this matters. The Northwest Passage is not a single road. It's a network of waterways threading through Canada's Arctic archipelago, linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For centuries, it was a death trap. Explorers froze, ships were crushed by ice, and the route was more myth than reality. It was theoretically valuable, but practically useless. Climate change erased that barrier. Arctic ice is disappearing at an accelerating pace. A passage once frozen solid most of the year is now navigable for longer periods every summer. By the 2030s, experts expect ice-free seasons to become common. By mid-century, year-round navigation with icebreaker support is increasingly realistic. The economic impact is staggering. A container ship traveling from Shanghai to New York through the Northwest Passage can save over 6,000 kilometers compared to the Panama Canal. That means fewer days at sea, lower fuel costs, and faster delivery for high-value cargo. Projections suggest that by 2050, the passage could handle 2 to 5% of global shipping traffic. That sounds small until you remember global maritime trade is worth around $20 trillion annually. 2% is $400 billion. 5% is $1 trillion. But shipping is only part of the story. The Canadian Arctic sits on massive reserves of critical minerals: rare earth elements, nickel, copper, lithium, zinc, and gold. These resources are essential for electric vehicles, defense systems, and renewable energy. For decades, they were economically inaccessible. No roads, no rail, no ports. Everything had to be flown out, making most projects impossible. The Northwest Passage changes that equation completely. Ports, icebreakers, and shipping lanes turn unreachable resources into viable exports. That's where the $900 billion figure comes from. Not just transit fees, but the combined value of shipping, mining, energy exports, and long-term strategic positioning over the next 3 decades. Whoever controls the passage controls access to those resources. Canada has claimed sovereignty over the Northwest Passage since 1946. The argument is simple. These are internal waters running through Canadian territory. Ships should require permission, just like on the St. Lawrence River. The United States has never accepted that claim. Washington insists the passage is an international strait, meaning any vessel has the right of transit passage. Canada can regulate safety and environment, but it cannot deny access. This disagreement has real history. In 1969, the American oil tanker Manhattan sailed through without permission. Canada protested, but couldn't stop it. In 1985, the U.S. icebreaker Polar Sea did the same. Again, no permission, no consequences. In 1988, both countries signed the Arctic Cooperation Agreement, essentially agreeing to disagree. The U.S. would notify Canada in advance, but neither side changed its legal position. The real issue wasn't law, it was enforcement. Canada simply lacked the ability to control the territory it claimed. Minimal military presence, limited Coast Guard capacity, no deep water ports, no year-round patrols. Meanwhile, Russia built a fleet of 50 icebreakers. China declared itself a near-Arctic state and began sending research vessels north. Canada could only issue diplomatic protests that were largely ignored. Trump changed the calculation overnight. His trade threats forced Ottawa to confront a hard truth. Dependence on the United States was a strategic vulnerability. Diversifying trade routes became an existential necessity. Suddenly, the Arctic wasn't symbolic, it was urgent. Carney moved fast. His first federal budget included $1 billion for Arctic infrastructure, not studies or planning, but construction, ports, roads, military facilities, and icebreakers. The centerpiece was the Port of Churchill Plus project. Churchill is Canada's only deep-water Arctic port connected by rail to the south. For decades, it was neglected. Carney committed $180 million to modernize it, extend the shipping season, and build capacity for exporting grain, potash, LNG, and critical minerals. Churchill was only the start. The broader Arctic Infrastructure Fund targets northern airports, all-weather roads, expanded Coast Guard presence, advanced radar systems, and permanent military facilities. And most importantly, $7 billion for 2 new Polar-class icebreakers. These aren't symbolic vessels. They can break through 3 meters of ice, operate year-round, and function in temperatures down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The timeline is aggressive. First delivery by 2030, second by 2032. Port upgrades already underway. Critical mineral export infrastructure operational within 5 years. This is not a distant vision. It's happening now. Here's what Washington didn't understand. Physical presence creates legal reality. Once Canada has year-round icebreaker patrols, it can require ships to check in, accept Canadian pilots, follow regulations, and pay navigation fees. Once ports offer refueling and repairs, compliance becomes practical. Legal arguments matter less when one country controls access, services, and enforcement. And here's the nightmare scenario for the United States. If the Northwest Passage is truly international, then China and Russia have the same rights as America. Unrestricted access by hostile powers collapses North American security. NORAD exists precisely because threats come over the Arctic. Allowing free transit undermines that defense perimeter. Some American strategists see the problem. Quiet conversations are happening about whether supporting Canadian sovereignty actually strengthens continental security. But that would require admitting Washington was wrong for 70 years. Trump isn't capable of that recalculation. And every month, Canada builds more infrastructure that makes its claim unavoidable. This creates a strange NATO dilemma. Canada and the US are allies, yet on opposite sides of a sovereignty dispute. NATO has no official position. European allies historically side with Canada, but won't openly defy Washington. That ambiguity works in Canada's favor. It allows infrastructure to advance without triggering an alliance crisis. The irony is sharp. Trump's pressure may benefit Russia and China more than anyone. Moscow sees the Arctic as central to its future. Beijing wants access. If the US insists the passage is international, it strengthens China's legal argument. Canada can't stop Chinese vessels if it can't stop American ones. Trump thought pressure would force compliance. Instead, he triggered the largest Arctic investment in Canadian history. By the mid-2000s and 30s, Canada will have ports, icebreakers, military presence, and the ability to regulate traffic regardless of foreign objections. Economic benefits will flow north, strategic leverage will shift, and American influence will shrink. The Arctic is opening, the passage is clearing, and Canada just backed its sovereignty with something paper claims never provided: